Please pray with me. Resurrecting God, find us, each one where we are, near the tomb, spices and love ready to hand, or asleep on the watch, too fearful to risk a peek to see if your good news is too good to be true. Lift the ancient once, twice, 4 times only story of your sons rising from death into the lived experience of our Lenten lives through the words I speak and the thoughts that we share. Amen. So I confess I've actually been sitting with a lectionary conundrum for days now. If I hadn't committed weeks ago to this wonderful video production with some of our youth and their ingenuity about rolling stones, I would have left aside John's mystically confident resurrection story and gone with what the lectionary gives us, which was Mark's wary, unfinished, fearful tale. Let me just quickly tell you what that was. There is no risen Jesus in Mark's story, only an empty tomb, not even a sighting of Jesus' body, and the angel doesn't even look like an angel in Mark. He simply says, he's not here. He's gone ahead of you to Galilee. The women who hear and see this absence, according to Mark, tell no one because they are too afraid. You may wonder why it is that I would choose that wary, diffident one over John's beautiful certainty. And I have reasons. Because here we are, again, our second pandemic Easter, into a third wave with variants of concern and the likelihood that we will be in lockdown for weeks, if not months to come. That's one reason. Another is because of the recent days' news of the outright violence against Asians. That hits too close to home, to my family, to my Burnaby grandchildren, and that makes me mad. Also because 8 Canadian women in 8 weeks, 120 last year, all dead because of conjugal violence. Because Joyce and Jocelyn, because Mamadi Kamara, because George Floyd, because so much ugly, so much death, so much systemic intransigence, so much blaming and cynicism and scapegoating, and we're all caught up in it, guilty and innocent, like birds and fish in some toxic sludge from an oil spill. And it is killing us, choking our hope, killing our faith in humanity. And yes, for some of us, it's killing our faith in God's ability to do anything about any of it at all. All these becauses killing our faith in the truth of this day, this Easter, this whole resurrection thing. Because I think right now our world is so like Mark the Gospeler's world. Did you know he wrote this gospel? Not in the thick of a pandemic, to be sure, but certainly within the thick of a violent final showdown between almighty Rome and piddly Judea. The oppressive omnipresence of armed brute squads invades the final scene of this gospel, as does that existential uncertainty about any future at all. So I guess I'm resonating with Mark this year, right now, more than with John's whimsical, mystical confidence. Except Mark's ending, where he says the women were terrified into silence. Well, it's not true, is it? If it were true, we wouldn't be here doing this. If it were true, John's generation wouldn't have even written their gospel. So what is it that happened in the 2 or 3 decades or so, between Mark's stunned silence here and John's mystical confidence? One thing is that John and his generation are living the far side of disaster. What was still looming and frightening for Mark has already happened, and it was terrible. Jerusalem had fallen, the temple had been obliterated, the people had been dispersed like seeds on the wind. Now, to be absolutely clear, when I say that John is writing to a generation living the far side of this disaster, they're not living in utopia either. John's world was still full of ugly, still full of needless death, racial bigotry, heck, even John is guilty of it himself, and still as prone as our pandemic, climate-critical, racially riven world to all the natural and human disasters that try and convince us that life is hopeless and death wins. But this story of the empty tomb, the declaration that he has risen and gone ahead of you, back to Galilee, back to the beginning, back to life, well, that has also dispersed on the wind like dandelion seeds in May. As one after another, people, whole communities of people from Jerusalem and Judea and all across the Eastern Mediterranean were telling their own personal stories of the truth that they knew in their bones, of this ridiculous mystery, that the crucifixion and the burial of Jesus was not the end, that death didn't win, that the tomb didn't constrain him, nor his gospel of the dream of God for a redeemed world. So that stunned silence of Easter morning's mourning women was only temporary. They did speak up. They spoke up and they spoke out. And because they did, John's gospel, a generation in the making, has confidence. His story isn't rushed. It's mystical. It's quiet. It's assured. It's dramatic and yet calm. Even sensuous. I use that word in the sense that the story invites us to feel its truth in our own bodies. It happens in a garden as dawn breaks. You know what that's like when dew unlocks the perfume of grass and olive leaves? And when birds prophesy the breaking day, and when shadows lose their inky blackness to resurrecting color. Inside Mary's body, there's that determination tinged with fear. And oh my, we know that sensation in our gut, don't we, when facing into horrors we must face for the sake of love. Then there's her salt-teared blindness of grief and distraction that leads her, as it would too, I'm sure us, to mistake the known one for a stranger. Until hearing the tone and inflection in a voice as the supposed gardener utters her name as only one person in the world ever could. Mary? Now there's that wide eyesight of recognition that burns away all doubt, and as John tells it, Here is the 2021 moment. There's that instant when Mary reaches out to touch and embrace, as all of us are aching to do. And right on cue for this year, John's Jesus says, no, not yet. 2 meters, a little while longer. Well, actually, he doesn't say 2 meters, but he does say not yet. Instead, with all of that pent-up energy bursting out of Mary, he commissions her instead and appoints her, Mary, a woman, to be apostle to the world, to declare, go and tell, Jesus is risen. Now, I so want to be Mary Magdalene. I want to barge through all of the locked doors like she did, and I want to loudly insist to the sleepyheads behind, he is risen. I've seen it. It's true. I want to be able to push back against all the tired anguish, doubt that is built up in our world in this past year, built up in me in this past year and longer. I want the mere sound of my voice to roll back racism, pandemic, climate crisis, economic injustice with this tsunami of apostolic confidence in God's resilient power to call dead things back to life. But I'm still with Mark's mourning women. I know, as they did, that it's never that simple. The task of true resurrection, not mere restoration, that is going to involve long, hard, lonely, often misunderstood, frequently undermined work for us to bend that arc another degree back towards the true north of God's dream for a redeemed world. But if I am with Mark's mourning women, it's okay. Because you know and I know that they did speak up. They did speak out. And they got on with the work of resurrection. As shall I. And I hope you will too. Amen.